Okay, thank you, everybody. Again, for the video, my name is Robert Taylor, professor at the University of Michigan. And today we're talking about civil rights. This is part of the Program for Research on Black Americans, Black History Month presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Harold Woody Neighbors will be monitoring the chat and asking a few questions here and there. So these are some of the things that we're going to discuss today. A lot on segregation sit-ins, a lot of time with James Lawson, Diane Nash, John Lewis. These are leaders of the civil rights movement. Z. Alexander Looby is also a lawyer that you may not have heard of. We'll talk a little bit about March on Washington and some family pictures. And the most important thing here is that this will be a little circular, okay? Just by the nature of it. So we try to follow some timeline, but it's a bit circular. So there's a few disturbing images, and this is just a trigger warning. And the N word is used in some of the slides and some of the videos. So here's a picture of my extended family. This is Thanksgiving 2019 in Brooklyn, New York. And this is the like maybe 2 days after Thanksgiving where we're eating out together for lunch. The extended family also spent Christmas in Washington, D.C., and we've done that a lot of years. And this is the year the Smithsonian first opened, the African American History Museum first opened, and this is some of our Hampton grads. And we had someone in the family had the bright idea, which I thought was a great idea, to all sport your college or whatever shirt you want to wear. And these again are the Hampton grads. This is my home in Nashville, Tennessee. This is my nephew, James Murray. And you can see it's a relatively modest home. It is a 3-bedroom, but in terms of size, it's really closer to a 2-bedroom. The bedroom that I was in with my brother was smaller than any walk-in closet that you could think of. This is a picture of me and my beautiful wife, Linda Chatters, and from years ago, and my brother-in-law, Walter Murray. We're going to discuss Walter a little bit later. I honestly have no idea when this picture was taken. I just know it's a while ago. This is a picture of my immediate family, and obviously I'm in the middle. But I showed this to all of my classes because my aunt, who again is living here in 1965, she was born in 1877. And her father was a slave, and her mother was born from a slave woman and a child of a slave master and a woman. This is the bus station in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm 4 years old around this time. You see, it's segregated. I was born and raised in Jim Crow. But I want to mention, when we think of segregation, we have a tendency to only think about waiting rooms and water fountains and things like that, things that are visible and easy to picture. But unfortunately, segregation was everything. In Nashville, the public schools, the Black schools got books that were third generation books. So I mean, third generation, they went from one school for several years and a second school for several years, and then they went to the Black schools. The YMCAs were segregated, movie theaters were segregated. I had a good friend, Charles. Charles was on the Washington Junior High football team. Charles practiced every day, 5 days a week, every afternoon from August to roughly beginning of November, typical, maybe into November, typical, junior high schedule. And because of segregation, they never played one football game. Boy Scouts are segregated. Again, everything was segregated. This is the Memphis Zoo. And you see, this is the Black Day of the Memphis Zoo. These are Black men being arrested for trying to use the library in Alexandria, Virginia. Again, this is a man who was able to get to graduate school at University of Oklahoma. But what you see is they put a partition in. This is Clement King. And he was put into what we call at that point an insane asylum for daring to register to go to grad school. So he attempted to enter a grad program at University of Mississippi. He was forcibly removed. 2 physicians then declared him insane. And he spent 2 weeks in the state asylum before his younger brother, again, a civil rights lawyer, secured his release. Let's assume that he was not fortunate enough to have a relative who's a lawyer in the 50s. There's no telling, he certainly would have been there much, much longer. This is a picture of a swimming pool that was filled in with dirt rather than allow Black people to swim. It's Lynchburg, Virginia. This is a man pouring acid in a pool because protesters jumped into the pool. It was, again, a whites-only pool. In Nashville, Tennessee, again, I am 9 years old now. They closed all the pools in the city rather than integrate them. This is the daycare I went to. And you see it's founded in 1926, first nonprofit child care in Nashville, established for the express purpose of serving Black low-income inner city and our city children. There's a movie theater I went to with my siblings. Again, all Black, segregated movie theater, rarely get first-run movies. This movie theater, because of the time, it's hard to believe that I only had to pay 10 cents to go to the movies. This is when schools were trying to be desegregated, and this is the protest against them in 56 and 57. Again, right in the middle, you see a Black man trying to enter the school. This is a great picture of Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King. The strength of the picture, because it's just a nice, really good picture. The weakness, and I don't want to call it a weakness, but the issue is that so many people, when they think of the civil rights movement, they think of it's only these 2 people, that there was nobody else. And what I want to show in this presentation is some idea of the number of people and how big of a movement this was. I don't have time to show this video, but I think it's really important to learn more about Rosa Parks. Her just deciding not to sit down that day is a total understatement of what really happened. There's a long history there. And just for the sake of time, I just don't have the time to go through it. And again, for this presentation, we'll spend a lot more time on Nashville. So this is, again, 56, 57. Callers threatens to throw acid in the faces and attack Black kids who were trying to integrate schools. And this is for elementary school. So again, here's one thread. I'm a Ku Kluxer, and we'll beat your little girl to death and string her up by her toes, then we'll burn your house. Here's another one. Throw acid on a boy and then burn a cross in front of her home. And again, I'm sharing this to show you the bravery of common everyday people during this period. This is C. Alexander Looby. He's an attorney for the NAACP and also an attorney for the student protesters. Again, during this period, this is a school that was bombed, as opposed to it being integrated. So, we talked a lot about segregation and restrictions. Now we talk more about sit-in movements. So this is the Greensboro, North Carolina sit-in movement, and many people think of this as the first sit-in movement. These are for college students who sat in. This counter is now at the Smithsonian. However, this wasn't the first, but it was the most noticeable. This is, and I'm not even sure if this was the first. This is 1958, 2 years earlier. And what makes this notable is that I knew Ron Walters, and he was a big friend of the Program for Research on Black Americans. He became a noted political scientist. And several of the political scientists that worked with us knew him. This is another one, a few months after that one, Clara Luper in Oklahoma City. So let's go back, let's take a step back. And what we see, when I say step back, we have the Greensboro sit-in. And the students in Nashville were almost upset. They were happy that people are moving. They were saying, but we have been practicing. We've been training for this, and it's time for us to move. And so what you see is shortly after the Greensboro sit-in, you see this one, but you see the organization, 124 students in all these different stores. But with the main ones being Woolworths, Kresge, and McClellan's, and they picked those because these were national chains. This was led in terms of nonviolent training by James Lawson, and also held in the church of Reverend Kelly Miller Smith and Diane Nash, who's also a leader of the movement. This is the church where all the meetings were held. This church just happens to be right downtown. You could walk to, it's right, Nashville State Capitol. It's right across from State Capitol, just a few blocks just a very few blocks from downtown Nashville. James Lawson teaching a nonviolence class at Vanderbilt. This is him being arrested as being just for being a movement leader. This is he gets expelled from Vanderbilt, and there's a protest of him being of his being expelled. He then received a full scholarship at Yale. This is James Lawson and Martin Luther King. This is James Lawson in 2020, and I'm pretty sure this is him speaking at a funeral. This comic book is important, and it's important because this is the comic book that inspired John Lewis to become active in the civil rights movement. So after reading this comic book, he actually met with Martin Luther King. And when he met with Martin Luther King gave him advice and said, well, if you're going to protest, you should not, or you should reconsider if you're going to protest in your hometown because you could get your family's farm burnt down. And so he ended up going to college in Nashville, and that's where he did all of his protest. This is John Lewis again speaking outside of Reverend Kelly Smith's church. And again, you can see this is the basement of the church, and you see the church right there. This is the parking lot of the church. There's gonna be a lot of pictures of John Lewis. And here he is at Woolworth's protesting. And you see him right in the middle. This is John Lewis, the first time he was arrested. This is from his Twitter feed. And he says, I tried to walk with a sense of pride and dignity. I felt free. I felt liberated. I felt like I crossed over. This is February 28th, 2018. Now, again, this happened February 28th, 62. Oh, maybe 60, I'm sorry. Yes, 60. This is a man being attacked at the lunch counter. This is Diane Nash in court. And my siblings told me once, I showed them this picture, they told me who the people are here. I need to have them tell me the names of the people here. I know these are, I believe, Tennessee State and Fisk administrators. This is C. Alexander Looby, again, right here. We showed you his picture earlier. Every time, again, he's a lawyer, he's a city councilman. Every time that he would speak, the judge would completely turn his back on him, would swivel the chair completely around. Attorney Looby and I attended the same church, and we lived in the same neighborhood. This is the church I went to and my family went to as a kid. I was an altar boy and at this church, and Attorney Looby was a very faithful member. And this is his bombed home in April 19th, 1960. Fortunately, his bedroom was in the back of the house, so he and his wife were not hurt. They did not have kids. Right across the street, this is an internal view. Right across the street is Meharry Medical College. So, just to give you an idea, if you take a look at this pretty carefully, just to give you an idea of where this is my house right here. I should say our family's house. And this is Meharry Medical College. And right here is where Attorney Looby's house was. Or I should say it still is. The other thing to notice that we don't have time to go through today is you see, this wasn't there then, but you see how the interstate went through and totally destroyed the Black neighborhood. This stretch right here was one of the major business districts in Nashville, the major entertainment, which was districts, which was totally destroyed by the interstate. And that's not uncommon. That happened in Detroit, happened in Baltimore, happened in numerous cities. Again, this is when the bomb went off, because it's so close to where we lived, it woke me up, it woke my brother up. Now, it didn't wake me up for long. I was just woke up like, whoa, what's this? And, a few minutes later, fell back asleep. These are the windows that it broke out, again, right from across the street. The house is right over here in the corner. Again, here's another picture of the house. Also, take a look at this house that's next to this really big house right here. And just for reference for the next slide. So this is 2015. This is the Looby house as it was in 2015. And you see they totally redid it. And you can see how it's fortified. You can tell by the glass and everything like that, the windows. This is where the parking lot is now. It's where the other house was. And this is St. Anselm Church. When I was 8, I walked by the church because that was my cut or my little path from school to home. And I was walking home, and I'm Episcopalian. This is an Episcopal church, and I knew the priest. And I said, "What happened here?" And he explained to me what had happened, that Attorney Looby's house had been bombed. This is the day that it was bombed, and Diane Nash leads a march on the state capitol. And if you notice, if you pay attention, this is also heavily documented in Eyes on the Prize documentary, which is on HBO. Again, another picture of the march. This is Diane Nash confronting the mayor. This is what we're covering now. It's not covered in the documentary. This is Dr. King at Fisk University the day after the bombing, giving a talk. But right as the talk was about to start, they had to evacuate the gym because of a bomb threat. And again, this is CT Vivian. This is Attorney Looby collapsing and weeping in his chair as he received a prolonged ovation that night. Again, this is Attorney Looby with Dr. King that night. And you see James Lawson in the background. In Dr. King's speech, he commended the city for leading one of the best organized and most disciplined sit-in movements in the South. This is CT Vivian getting the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And he died the same week as John Lewis, well, just a few days before John Lewis. This is the day the lunch counters were integrated. And again, here's a letter, I'm not going to go through this, from Martin Luther King to the Nashville students. So I want to put this in perspective. Nashville sit-in movement is somewhat successful, but the Freedom Riders were having a rough time. The one bus had been bombed, and then after the second one, John Lewis and others were attacked. And then this is what happens during this period.
My phone in the hotel room rings, and it's the Attorney General. And he opens the conversation. Who the hell is Diane Nash? Call her and let her know what is waiting for the Freedom Riders. So I called her. I said, I understand that there are more Freedom Riders coming down from Nashville. You must stop them if you can. Her response was, they're not going to turn back. They're on the way to Birmingham, and they'll be there shortly. You know that spiritual, like a tree standing by the water, I will not be moved. She would not be moved. And I felt my voice go up another decibel and another, and soon I was shouting, young woman, do you understand what you're doing? You're going to get somebody, do you understand you're going to get somebody killed? And there's a pause, and she said, sir, you should know we all signed our last wills and testaments last night before they left. We know someone will be killed, but we cannot let violence overcome nonviolence. That's virtually a direct quote of the words that came out of that child's mouth. Here I am, an official of the United States government representing the President and the Attorney General, talking to a student at Fisk University. And she, in a very quiet but strong way, gave me a lecture.
This is Diane Nash in 2013. Diane Nash 2016. And she is sitting next to my sister. This is my sister, Linda Chattis, excuse me. That's an old man talking. My sister, Donna Murray. Again, this is Diane Nash. If you look carefully, you may see somebody you also know here. And that's me right here with Diane Nash. And we will talk about this in a little bit. So many people think that, again, the Nashville civil rights movement is over at this point. And in terms of civil rights literature, it sort of ends a little bit. They move on to Selma and other cities. However, is very active and is still active with many of the same players. Okay, the main person who sort of moved on is Diane Nash, who you don't hear about nearly as much because she is now working in Mississippi, and there's just no publicity coming out of Mississippi. So these are pictures of trying to integrate and successfully over time integrating the movie theaters. And what people would do is they would line up, they would try to buy a ticket. The ticket person, counter person say, no, you can't. They get back in line again, and over and over and over and over. And that was the protest. This is John Lewis, again, downtown Nashville, being arrested, trying to integrate this hamburger place. This is, again, the same hamburger place and a civil rights worker, which is a professor at Vanderbilt, getting hit. And if you notice one thing, for people who know me, you see the guy's name who's hit him is Bobby Jean Taylor, which is why I never use Bobby, but it's also why there's a million Robert Taylors out there, which is why I always go by Robert Joseph Taylor. My mother told me that. So, segregate. This is a protest in Nashville in 1963. And at this point, these are times where, cases where you might see some of my relatives in some of these walks and at courtrooms and things. As you see, these are kids. This is a girl who was knocked unconscious and hit by a billy club, and she's only 15. These are demonstrators being rocks and soda bottles being thrown at them, and they're running back to the First Baptist Church. This is again another John Lewis, also at a different sit-in, and at the same sit-in, but again, an injured an injured young woman. This is again a picture of the protest. This is in the middle of a very big major street in Nashville, Tennessee. This is again march to downtown, trials of demonstrators in April. This is Martin Luther King again back at Fisk University, and if you notice one thing, all these pictures will be at Fisk in terms of people talking, because Fisk is a private school, they could do that. None of this could ever be done at the public Tennessee State. Again, this is a picture of another march right at the same period. And these are jailed students. And you see how many were jailed. Again, you see John Lewis again. And I got these names from my relatives, O.D. Hunt, Dennis Gregory Foote, and again, John Lewis right there. One thing you notice is how well people dressed, okay? That was part of the movement process, is that you look professional and you act professional and you stay nonviolent. So we're gonna move on a little bit. This is Freedom Riders. This is from Gallup poll, and you see the dates. Only 22% of people approved of the Freedom Riders. This is Dr. King at the March on Washington. My friend Woody Neighbors happened to go there to be at that march. 10 weeks before the March on Washington, there were 758 demonstrations in 186 cities, resulting in almost 15,000 arrests. Again, this is the important point here is that this is a big, broad movement, but it's also an international movement. Between 1960, the first sit-in, and August 63, the March on Washington, all these countries became independent. All these formerly colonial countries became independent. At the March on Washington, 85% of African Americans and Black people approved the march. Only 1 in 5 whites approved the march. King's "I Have a Dream" speech received no mention in the Washington Post the following day. Remember, this is in Washington. It is now considered one of the best speeches in the U.S. history. These are MLK approval ratings. Again, it's just important for people to understand the context of this. And what you see is that they were never, so you see 63, his ratings were never highly positive, right? And by the time you get to 66, we're seeing only 32% positive, but most importantly, 63% negative. This is very standard, the kind of types of editorials and cartoons you will see during this period. This is King, John Lewis, Reverend Abernathy, all sort of a land at the side of the road. Well, why are they laying at the side of the road? Well, you have to remember the day, this period. And this is the period, still the period of the Green Book. There are very few places where African Americans could go. On the way to the March on Washington, King and others had to relieve themselves at the side of the road because there weren't places for them to go. So you can see how things have changed. So in 1999, Gallup found King was the second most admired person of the century. And then Mother Teresa, and then John Kennedy and others. This is a great book to read if you want to hear about this, about really the civil rights movement. So I want to talk about reactions to the death of JFK. So this is a Black boy in a white school. And again, I asked my very close friends to give me some of their recollections. So these are 2 of them. And I asked them this several years ago. So I'll read the bottom one. After school, I boarded the bus. The vast majority of my classmates were happy and cheering. When I asked what was going on, they smiled and laughed and said, "Kennedy's dead." I just sat in silence all the way home, trying to digest how they could be so happy. We loved JFK at my house, and I naively assumed that everyone else did as well. I grew up in the suburbs of central Pennsylvania. I was in the middle of a spelling test. Okay, I'm gonna move on. However, at the grocery and in any public location, all the white people were saying, "The nigger-loving president is dead." I remember a grocery store clerk saying something like, "How are you feeling since the nigger-loving president is dead?" Again, these are things you don't hear now. I'm going to switch to do another short video. Woody, are there any questions for me? Comments?
No questions from the gallery. There's lots of interesting comments that are coming in, but I think most people are reading them. But if you don't mind, I actually have a question for you.
Yes, go ahead. Yep.
You know,
Yeah,
oh,
go
there
ahead.
you are. You disappeared for a second. You and I have traveled this path a number of times before. And one of the things you and I know is that we experienced uh, desegregation and integration at very different points in our lives. For me, it was actually the second grade. And I know for you, it was later
Yeah.
in life. Could you say just a little bit about the first time you had to actually go to school with white kids, number one, and number two, what that first day was like for you?
You know, it's really fascinating because even though I grew up in segregation, in some ways it helped me when we integrated because it turns out, you know, I went to Catholic school and I went to Catholic school. I later found out because my mother said she wanted to make sure I didn't act crazy because at that time my father had died. So she knew Catholics were pretty strict on rules and regulations and things like that. I say the Catholic schools were. So when I went, I was in the ninth grade, but I went with all of my segregated schoolmates. And so I went to all boys school, but there was like 20 of us. So I was never by myself. And so I never, you know, we could always stick to each other until you met some white friends. But even with the white friends, they were, I don't even want to call them friends, they were more colleagues than friends. That we were never invited over anybody's house, we were never invited to a party, nor did we invite them over because it just like an unwritten rule. You didn't even think about it. Yeah, Woody, that's a great question.
So, yeah, I mean, I hear you say you were in the ninth grade, and in the interest of time, I won't go into my story, but I'll just say, even though we were at very different ages, the unwritten rule, even though I was very young, I picked up on the unwritten rule pretty quickly. I didn't have anybody from my neighborhood going to school with me, but when I walked into my second grade class, there was one, black boy there. And I remember feeling relieved.
Yeah.
And then he and I became best friends.
Yeah.
We do have a question from Robin.
Okay.
Where are most of the Nashville historical photos from?
Oh, great question. I have a colleague named LaRotha Williams, and he does great stuff. He calls himself, and I arguably call him this too, the North Nashville historian. But so he's done a lot of stuff. But in addition, the Nashville Tennessean did a great job of documenting this stuff. And I just I'm on Twitter, and I just look for these pictures, and I've been doing this for maybe 10 years now. So I literally have 100 more pictures that I just can't show because of time. So I want to go ahead and show this. This is a reaction to the death of JFK. This is a series. You can find this stuff on YouTube, Black Magic. It's an ESPN series, and it's the intersection of basketball and civil rights.
That you don't believe in.
He joined a World Peace Organization and went to Africa, where he coached everything from cricket to basketball. When he returned to the U.S. in the autumn of 1963, he entered a PhD program at the University of Tennessee.
20-some thousand kids. There were only 6 blacks in the whole school, only 6 of us. I was in class one day, and I'll never forget that. Had a great professor, Dr. Orrin B. Graff, was in class one day. Someone walked in and whispered something in his ear. And he dismissed the class. And we didn't know what was going on. Before we could get to the parking lot, there were horns blowing. Kids were blowing their horns and rebel flags were flowing. The South would rise again. But they were celebrating. And man, it hurt. I mean, you talking about... I didn't open my mouth. I just turned right around and I walked into my room. I locked the door. And I stayed in there for about 4 days. I didn't come out. I was there for the end of that semester. And then I left.
In the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
This is Memphis newspapers right at the time. And for people who may not remember this and know this, Dr. King went to Memphis and he was actually pretty tired and he sort of didn't want to go, but it was such a horrible thing that happened. 2 sanitation workers got killed and just by doing their job. And that's where you see, if you remember, the pictures, I am a man, as part of the protest. But these are types of editorials that you saw this, you see, this is anarchy, that these sanitation workers are on strike. Again, this is days before MLK's assassination in the Memphis newspaper. This is the same day that he's assassinated with Jesse Jackson. Again, with James Lawson. This is the picture of him right after he's killed. According to his biographer, Taylor Branch, his autopsy revealed that he was although he was only 39 years old, he had the heart of a 60-year-old, which Branch attributed to the stress of 13 years in the civil rights movement. This in Nashville, there are definitely protests and some rioting and some shooting. These are things that happen in my neighborhood. This is just a few blocks away, and you see the National Guard was called in. And again, this is an area where I used to get my hair cut, just a few blocks away, right, pretty close to Tennessee State. My best friend's name was Clyde, and I never saw these tanks and stuff, but Clyde did. They were up and down his neighborhood, and he even showed me. He went to the middle of the street and showed me the tracks they had made in the street. Now we move on a little bit to a little family stuff, a little bit more lighthearted. So this is my picture of my father in the 1948 yearbook. Down here in the corner, this is my father right here. So Harry W. Taylor. This is my sister. She's a Tennessee State grad, and this is from the yearbook. Her name is Mary Greer, but then Mary Taylor, but now Mary Greer. A little bit about my mother, getting into Fisk. They had to drive to Fisk, and she's from New Jersey. And as part of the driving there, they were in a house having dinner, which is very typical. A lot of restaurants, black restaurants, were in houses then, and they told people, "Oh yeah, we're driving all night through Virginia, or West Virginia, or wherever. Can't remember exactly where, through the Appalachians." And all the black people said, "No, you're not. It's just way too dangerous for any black person to drive at night in those areas." There's a picture of my mother right here, circled. Here's a picture of my mother. There's a high school picture. And you can see, or you probably can't see this, I'll read it, that her name's Willie Holt then, but Willie Taylor. Willie is planning to enter Fisk University to further her studies. And I just want to mention Frank, who's above her. And Frank, and as his bio says, Frank loves the ladies, especially the Irish. We're currently setting up a scholarship at Fisk under my mother's name. I was actually talking to a person today. We'll have that set up in just a few days. This is my brother, right here in the middle, the tall guy, gray hair and glasses. At a 2013, given money to Tennessee State. And he also has a scholarship under his name at Tennessee State. If anybody wants to contribute to either of these, just email me and I will send you the information. We are heading on the home stretch now. I'm going to cover Walter Murray, and then we'll cover Perry Wallace. So Walter Murray was a Vanderbilt graduate who became the university's first black trustee. Walter is my brother-in-law, married to my sister, Donna. He died in 1998 at the age of 49. Again, we are here. Again, this is my sister next to Diane Nash. That's her son, James. And again, that's me. And we are there for the Murray Lecture that's held at Vanderbilt. This is a picture of my nephew. He owns is an entrepreneur. He owns this company called Theramatch that provides mental health care matches mental health providers with individuals at corporations. My brother-in-law Walter was a born leader, and his very first day of class at Vanderbilt, he is only one of a handful of students. One of the professors, as you walked in, sort of say like, "Oh, one of these," I don't know if he said N-word or something, but said, "One of them is in our class." And instead of sitting down, my brother-in-law just left the class and went straight to the provost, to the president's office, and complained. Again, he's always a born leader. It didn't take any stuff. Even though you see he's always short in stature, but always a born leader. This is him right here on the right. This is him. He had a band scholarship. And we have that saxophone right now in my house. This is Fannie Lou Hamer and her husband. And this is my brother-in-law at a talk with Fannie Lou Hamer at Vanderbilt while he was a student. I believe this is while he was a student. In '61, Fannie Lou Hamer received a hysterectomy by a white doctor without her consent while undergoing a surgery to remove a uterine tumor. Unable to have children of her own, the Hamers adopted two daughters. This was called a Mississippi appendectomy. And this was essentially the involuntary sterilization of poor Black women who were deemed unfit to reproduce. This is again what happened to her. This is a picture of my brother-in-law, Walter, at Vanderbilt. This is him in the mid-'90s with John Lewis. My brother-in-law was a pastor of a church in the suburbs of Boston. This is Murray House at Vanderbilt. So this is the dorm that's named after him. And his best friend, and they went to high school together, was Perry Wallace. And they knew each other since kids. I think they played music together and stuff. And I want to go now. I'm going to stop this share real quick. So this is a short video about Perry Wallace. There's some commentary in the middle of it by the guy, Skip Gates at Harvard. I don't particularly like his commentary, but it is here.
My parents and my teachers.
Excuse me. Give me a second. This is the wrong video. Okay.
In 1966, when Perry Wallace integrated the Southeastern Conference by entering Vanderbilt, he faced tremendous adversity.
We had our Ole Miss game on the road canceled for suspicious reasons. They said that was a scheduling conflict. It was pretty clear that Ole Miss canceled our game there because Vanderbilt had black players. Now, where we did go that year was Mississippi State, Starkville, Mississippi. That was quite an initiation into being black and playing at these Deep South universities. Starkville had crowds right up on you, very small gym, you can hear everything that they say. And they just let loose with as much hatred, with as many racial epithets, just constant. And it was just hellish. You'd hear a nigger, shoe polish, coon, we're gonna hang you, we're gonna lynch you, we're gonna burn you, you know, at the stake, and on and on and on. Just the whole, just the whole deal, constantly.
The violence attendant upon the integration of the Negro into historically white sports arenas was about the fear of sex, manifesting itself through this game which allows people to express so many raw emotions which are submerged in their normal lives. That's why people go to games and go crazy. Although we have to repress 5 days a week in the workplace, allowed to come to the fore in sports arenas. It's the American equivalent of Carnival. And it was the proximity of the players to the cheerleaders that was one of the great dangers of the integration of sports. Look at all of these scarcely clad bodies on the basketball court. I mean, dripping with sweat, little white girls running around in pseudo panties. I mean, big black guys slam dunking the ball. I mean, you don't have to be Sigmund Freud to figure out all the phallic symbols and the sexual overtones of a basketball game.
The bands playing Dixie, always the rebel flags, and the cheerleaders leading cheers against me in particular. Get the nigga, rah, rah, rah. Nobody addressed the issue of how I was treated at those games. Nobody talked about it. Nobody mentioned it. Some people even denied it. My reaction was, wait a minute. Now, are we in this together, or are we not?
Okay, give me a second. I'm gonna switched my share.
Robert, we do have another question for you if you want to take it now.
Yes, I'll take it now.
Okay, this is a very good question. Comes from Skip.
Mhm.
And he says, with so much history in Tennessee with TSU, I can't believe I almost said TCU, TSU, Fisk, and Vanderbilt, how did you end up at Northwestern?
That is a great question. So both my, so it's four of us in my family. My older brother and sister went to Tennessee State. My older sister went to Fisk. But I wanted to get away. I was just really fortunate to have graduated right when integration was opening up for schools around the country. And I had a really good friend, or I shouldn't say a good friend, but a guy we looked up to who went to Northwestern. And so once he went to Northwestern, it was like, oh, and so actually 3 or 4 of us went to Northwestern after him. He was a very smart guy, also played basketball, very nice guy. And, you know, we just liked the name. We had no idea that was a good school. No idea.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That was a great question. You want to take another one?
Yes.
Okay, it's from Robin.
Mm-hmm.
She wants to know, how successful do you think the movements were in Nashville? She says that, I know you don't live there now,
mm-hmm.
but do you see the fruits of the sacrifices reflected in the African American community there today?
Wow, that is a great question. Because yes, you certainly saw the fruits, but now you see such an unbelievable backlash. I mean, the backlash now is just crazy. But yes, I would say so. When I look at, people, some of the people I knew, and I see where they've been and what they've been doing, it's pretty amazing. So yes, I think that it was very, very successful. But I also think that, both can be true, but the backlash now is unbelievable. So we are coming just a few more minutes here in terms of the end of my presentation. So I'll move on. So Perry Wallace was a professor. He died in 2017. He's a law professor. This is his book that was written by him. This book actually started as a class paper by this writer. And one thing that Perry mentions in the book that's really fascinating and sort of sad is that, he was a pretty religious guy. And I think he's the only child. And because he was busy between sports and studying, that he started going to a chapel on Vanderbilt's campus every Sunday until the pastor asked him to stop coming because the pastor was getting so many complaints from the white parishioners. This has been Job. He was, and I do this, I do variations of this presentations for my students, so they recognize that even though this seemed like a long time ago, and it was, that people are still living. This has been Job. This is the guy who was in the JFK video. And this is a conclusion. And what you see here is sort of ties people together. So we started off with James Lawson, and then we go to my brother-in-law, Walter Murray, and then we ended up with Perry Wallace. And I know these pictures have moved someplace else, but these are all sort of Black people who've had a major impact on Vanderbilt. And I just have one other picture since we have a minute of time. This is just me and the fellas hanging out. We're actually on our way to a concert. And believe it or not, I'm going to stop my share. We're going to see Beyonce. So we'll leave it at that. Questions? and they don't have to be put in chat now because there's enough of us here. Yeah.
We can open it up for people to just fire away. Robert, since you did mention it in your presentation, I'm going to show the audience. Hope you can see it. This is my button from the first March on Washington. It's one of my most prized possessions that somehow from 1963 until now, I've been able to keep hold of this button.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Meredith.
So having lived through all of this, how does that shape how you mentor and teach up like Black scholars to navigate the spaces that they navigate?
It is interesting. You know, I have a few of my relatives on here, and we can be pretty pushy at times. So part of my wife would agree with that. So part of the mentoring is just like, oh, I think this is the right way, so you should do it this way. But in the same way, I think sometimes I have a little bit less tolerance because, like, what are you complaining about? This is nothing. You know, look what other people went through. So, so we try to balance that. But bottom line is that, at least for me, and I think most of y'all know that mentoring is really important and is critical. And I think both Woody and I, when we've talked about this, that in many ways is way more important than the publications and all the other stuff. Oh, Linda, you should probably stop recording now. Deborah?
Yeah, thanks so much, Robert. And